It is going to be very hard to dislodge Labor in New South Wales. Some of the suggestions about the result in New South Wales on Saturday are ridiculous.
Joe Hockey, good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Barry.
We know you will try and lower expectations, but that was ridiculous.
Well, the fact of the matter is that I would never have predicted how extensive the swing would be to the Liberal Party. I would never have predicted a 30% swing against the Labor Party in Bathurst. Some of the numbers we saw last night were far larger than by-election swings in Penrith or in Ryde only 2 years ago. And that's an interesting point, that in fact the margin in Penrith is now larger than it was at a horrific by-election result for Labor. That indicates that the carbon tax obviously did have some role to play in the last few days.
So why was it? Which way do you go? Do you think it was because Labor was just so hopeless, or that Barry O'Farrell ran a good campaign?
Well, I think, look, it was a terrible government, Barry. I mean, everywhere I've been over the last few years, I've said I know a bad government because I come from New South Wales, and everyone laughed, but it was true. And it has been a terrible government, a corrupt government. There's been gross maladministration. That's all true. But to dig so deep into Labor Party heartland, we had to offer a stable, trustworthy, honest alternative. Barry O'Farrell did that. Barry O'Farrell's values are the values of the modern Liberal Party. They are about giving people a strong voice, but leading as well, and ensuring that we have honesty and integrity in government.
Now, public transport is going to be critical. Barry O'Farrell has some ideas about how he would like to spend the billions of dollars that seem to be available. The federal government has different ideas. How do you see that playing out?
Well, Barry O'Farrell has a very clear mandate to spend that money on the northwest and southwest railway lines as a priority. If Labor doesn't listen to Barry O'Farrell and the mandate of the New South Wales people, then the Labor Party is going to be punished. I mean, I've even heard this morning where they're discounting the impact of the carbon tax. They're saying, look, it was just a bad government. The Liberals just stumbled in. Let them believe that. Because what we will do is confirm in the minds of the Australian people and the people in New South Wales that they're not really listening. But
the carbon tax, so if you look at the federal polls, there's been very little... there was a movement against Julia Gillard early on, but it's back where it was.
I think there's a lot of volatility in some of the polling. Can I tell you, Barry, I was privy to the internal polling of the Liberal Party during the course of the campaign, and at the very end, some of the seats we won last night, we were not anticipating winning at all. In fact, we thought Labor was going to hang on to them. So polling, from my perspective, is just not as accurate as a lot of commentators would like to think. And I think you've got to overlay polling with your sense of what people are saying on the ground and what they're feeling. The biggest issue in New South Wales was cost of living. It is cost of living 1, 2 and 3. And now the Labor Party's put on a flood tax, it's put on carbon tax, it is overseeing the increase in interest rates, it's seeing an increase in the everyday cost of living, and people have had jack of it. And these people aren't listening in Canberra.
But it was a disaster for Labor at the state level, and yet, as I said, the most recent news poll has Labor just in front at the federal level. So if the carbon tax is such a big issue, is there something wrong with your messenger at the federal level?
No, not at all. Tony Abbott was introducing Barry O'Farrell at the launch. And, of course, I was involved in the campaign as well. I did a live cross on a national TV network from Port Macquarie yesterday. So we were very involved, and we were very supportive of the state campaign. But, Barry O'Farrell wouldn't have been talking about the carbon tax, even in his thank you speech last night. He wouldn't have mentioned it if it wasn't about winning votes and also taking a message to Canberra.
OK, just on climate change, why did you not go outside Parliament House to that rally on Wednesday?
Well, because Wayne Swan indicated that he was going to have a ministerial statement. I had to write a response in a very short period of time.
So if it wasn't for that, you would have been there?
Yep.
Do you think you would have had a good look around and had a look at the placards before you went to the microphone?
Oh, can I tell you, Barry, this is the greatest sideshow, this placard stuff. I mean, I've been to protests for many years. In fact, I stood on a stage with Jack Mundy at Town Hall in Sydney protesting against university fees many years ago. And you can't control what happens in a crowd. That's the spontaneity of a protest. And Tony Abbott had no idea about those posters and placards. I mean, for goodness sake, I'd like to see some of the things that have been at protests that Julia Gillard and Bob Brown have attended over the years.
Yeah, it's the problem, though, that photos do exist, and do you think that will be a damaging image for him?
Look, I think Australians are smarter than some of the spin about that stuff. They see through it, and you know, the Labor Party is very good at organising protests because they whistle up the union movement and they roll out tens of thousands of people to take a day off work. The Liberal Party relies on spontaneity in the community, and of course it's not controllable, nor should it be. That's democracy.
Well, let's go to the substance of that issue. And the Grattan Institute put out a report this week that concluded the best way to hit the targets without an excessive cost on the taxpayer is an economy-wide carbon trading scheme. Now, that's the Grattan Institute.
Well, the Grattan Institute is well respected. I know Sol Eslake's down there, and they've got a view. There are others with a different view. Our view is that direct action will deliver that 5% reduction by 2020. We're standing by that, and I think it's also the case that when you actually set up a carbon trading scheme without the rest of the world moving, you're setting up a market in Australia that is doomed to significant structural problems because you find it difficult to purchase permits from overseas. You're penalising trade-exposed industries. So direct action is the fastest way to get on with the job.
But one of the points the Grattan Institute makes is that you do it under a carbon trading scheme, and businesses decide for themselves then how best to reduce their emissions. That's how the markets work, and that's what the Liberal Party has always believed in. And in fact, you've spoken in the past about your support for a market-based system.
I believe in markets, of course we do. But markets only work if there is transparency, if there is accountability, and in the case of something involving global emissions, that there is a global marketplace. It's like the trading of currencies. They are cross-border activities. Therefore, you want some rules about what's going to apply right around the world because it becomes a common market. If you set up a market just for Australia, you are penalising Australian industry and creating a distortion in the Australian economy that is going to have a negative impact on us. And that's why I am a firm believer in getting on with the job of dealing with climate change with direct action. And we're funding that directly from the budget, no additional cost.
Yeah, but it does say in that report that it's highly unlikely that your approach would achieve the targets. You'll either fall short or you'll need to spend a lot more.
Well, they're entitled to their view, Barry. I disagree.
OK, well, let's move on to the mining tax now, the resources tax. And the Treasurer has finally reached an agreement with the industry to impose the tax, and still, even though they've reached an agreement with industry, you oppose it.
Well, they haven't reached an agreement with all the industry. They've reached an agreement with three entities, Xstrata, BHP and Rio.
And they will pay the bulk of the taxes. Well,
not according to some of the others. I think this is the most extraordinary process. This is version 4 of the mining tax, and it hasn't even got to Parliament. Version 4 of the mining tax, and they think they've reached an agreement where they've got what will have to be a blank cheque to the states on royalties. Already the Premier of Western Australia is saying he's going to totally ignore the Gillard government commitment on royalties. I say to you, Barry, this is a complete mess. I've never seen something so befuddled as what the Labor Party's done with the mining tax, but they're going to give it a good show with the carbon tax. They're going to give it a fair shake.
But how do you argue to the community that when you've got a situation where the mining companies now are making record profits, they're at record investment levels, the three biggest companies are prepared to pay this tax, and you oppose it?
I'll tell you why, Barry, because the government is locking in expenditure against the projected revenue of that mining tax. They're locking in expenditure. So when the revenue falls and it doesn't meet all of their lofty expectations, and when it is truly revealed that BHP and Rio and Xstrata and so on aren't paying the sort of tax that everyone is claiming, they'll have a structural deficit that they cannot deal with because the revenue is going to weaken and the expenditure is going to grow. And that's the problem that Labor has. They like to spend taxpayers' money without putting anything aside for a rainy day. And it will unwind, it will unfold.
Do you think it'll get through the Parliament, given the Greens and the Independents have got concerns about it, but for different reasons?
I have no idea, Barry. I've got to tell you, I find it very difficult to read the Greens, and I find it even more difficult to read the Independents. So this is the uncertainty that is part and parcel of a hung Parliament.
Just finally on taxation and the Henry Tax Review, you've said the review allows the government to deliver lower and fairer taxes. Does that mean that you're a supporter of the Henry tax scales?
Well, in the context of the total Henry Review, there is strong merit in increasing the tax-free threshold and reducing the marginal tax rate for individuals. But I'd say to you, the interesting thing is that when Ross Garnaut said he wanted to look at the Henry tax scales as a way of providing compensation to low-income people, the government didn't kill it off immediately. They let that fly. And when they realised that it wouldn't work, they then said, let's look at the low-income tax offset. And that's what Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan have been clinging to. Ken Henry recommended abolishing the low-income tax offset. And the problem with the low-income tax offset is it's a rebate at the end of the year. So Australian families are going to be worse off during the course of the year when they're paying higher electricity prices and petrol prices and so on.
Did Garnaut actually say he wanted the government to use the Henry tax scales, or he just simply said they ought to compensate through the taxation system?
No, he actually referred to the Henry report in his statement. He actually referred to the Henry report.
But did he endorse the Henry tax scales as the way to compensate?
That was one of the things that when you read Garnaut's report, as I did, it was pretty clear that what he was saying was that you should look at the Henry tax reductions as a way of delivering compensation to low-income people, which quite surprised me.
Because the government seems to be saying now that it certainly wouldn't use those scales to compensate over the climate change thing, but they haven't ruled out using the taxation system just the same.
Well, so, OK, let's get some perspective here. So the Labor Party is saying they commissioned the most significant review of the Australian taxation system in a generation, as they suggest. They had 138 recommendations. They did not rule out the Henry tax scales, but now they're saying, well, they do rule out those Henry tax scales, and they're going to go back and redraw the tax scales themselves.
No,
what sort of government
cross
is this?
purposes here. I mean, they're saying they won't use the Henry tax scales to compensate for a carbon tax, but that doesn't rule out at some other stage looking at the Henry report in a different context.
No, but how are they going to give the tax cuts, Barry? How do you get tax cuts if you don't change the tax scales? I mean, it's obvious. You've either got to change the threshold or you've got to change the marginal tax rates. And if you do that, then everyone paying personal income tax is going to have a tax cut. And they're saying, well, no, they really want to target lower income people. Well, if they do that with a low income tax offset, again, that defies a recommendation of Henry. So either the Henry tax review is a blueprint and they actually go through the process of consulting and do something about it, or, as is this government's way, they are making it up as they go along because they just don't know where they're going.
Yeah, I just made the point, though, why couldn't it be two entirely different exercises?
Because one will conflict with the other. Quite obviously. I mean, Henry has provided a pathway to an integrated tax and welfare system that has significantly changed from what we have at the moment. If the government ignores that and puts in place low-income tax offset or comes up with new tax scales, then Henry's out the door. It's finished. The Henry tax scales and the transfer system are all finished. So I think that's probably the case. This is a government that will say and do anything along the way because they're making it up as they go.
OK, thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Barry.